Very first memories takes place when I was about 3 or 4 years old. It was nighttime. I was in bed and I couldn't sleep. I laid there unmoving, staring at the ceiling. And the reason that I couldn't sleep was because I was filled with an overwhelming sense of anxiety and fear. You see, I was absolutely convinced that a lion was going to jump through my window and attack me. Now, there's no basis for this fear. I was in Ontario, where we don't have lions, and even if a lion somehow managed to make its way into my backyard, I was on the second floor of a house with a closed window. But even being reassured about the impossibility of it happening, I was still filled with fear. This was the first time that I remember having these feelings, but unfortunately, it wasn't the last. Over the years, I've had many moments of this almost paralyzing fear, where I can't sleep, where I can't eat, where I constantly feel sick to my stomach, where it takes all of my energy to just get up. And most annoyingly, where I can't stop the never-ending thoughts going through my head that tell me something terrible is about to happen. When I first heard the quote by Mark Twain that says, "I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened," I thought to myself, that is exactly what anxiety is like, because I have been through many terrible things in my life, but I have only experienced them in my mind. Most of those things that I thought about incessantly that filled me with so much fear never actually happened. It wasn't until 15 years ago, more than 20 years after my first experiences with anxiety, that I was finally diagnosed and given a name and help for what I had, which was generalized anxiety disorder. And things slowly started to improve. But I still felt very much alone. You see, when I was growing up and when I was first diagnosed, no one really knew anything about mental illness. There wasn't a lot of education about mental illness. It's not like today, where there's workshops in schools and there's resources handed out. And it seems like everybody has been educated on signs of mental illness and how to support people. But I didn't have any of that. I didn't really have anything. My parents, my family, they just called me a worrier. And they would say, "Stop worrying," which, of course, is impossible for somebody with anxiety. Or I would hear things like, "It's all in your head," which means they didn't actually think that what you have is a real problem. However, I made it through this time, scarred, but not broken, managing, but not healed. And several years ago, I started wondering, how did I get through this time? What helped me to cope when I had so many days, weeks, and even months of almost paralyzing fear? How did I get through this? And I realized that there actually was something that helped me get through this, something that I relied on year after year. And that something was reading. Now, as many memories as I have of anxious times in my life, I have an equal amount of memories of reading books. I can remember being a little girl sitting with a big pile of books, desperately trying to figure out what the words on the pages were, asking my parents, "Please teach me how to read." And once I could read, I took a book with me everywhere I went. I always had a book with me. And I've realized that reading actually helped me to cope with my feelings of anxiety, because reading helped me take my mind off of whatever was worrying me at the time. And And this isn't actually even a new concept. The idea that reading can heal has been around for a long time. I started researching it a couple of years ago, and I found I'm not the only person this has helped. I'm not the only person that reading has helped with dealing with a mental illness. It's been around for centuries. Over doorways to ancient libraries, they have found inscriptions that read that the library is healing to the soul. And that's from 2,000 years ago. William Shakespeare wrote, "Come and take choice of all my library, and so beguile thy sorrow," meaning that reading will lead you away from your sorrows. So reading as healing has been around for a long time. Today, counselors use what they call bibliotherapy. And what bibliotherapy is the reading of specific texts with the purpose of healing. So counselors can prescribe a book just like a doctor can prescribe medication. And they have found that when patients read the book that they prescribe, it actually reduces their treatment time, and then it increases their insight and behavior change. A few years ago, a book was published called The Novel Cure, From Abandonment to Zestlessness, 751 Books to Cure What Ails You, by Ella Berthand and Susan Elderkin. Now, this book has 751 ailments. You figure out what your ailment is. Once you do, it will lead you to a book to read to help relieve you of the symptoms of those ailments. Some of these ailments they list are serious ones. Some not so serious, like hating being short, hating your nose, or suffering from itchy teeth. And once you know what your ailment is, they'll tell you to read a book that will help you. So for those of you who are suffering from a broken heart, they recommend that you read Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. For those of you who hate your nose, they recommend reading Perfume, the Story of a Murderer. And if you have anxiety like I do, then they recommend that you read Henry James' The Portrait of a Lady. The idea is that whatever your ailment is, you can help relieve symptoms of those ailments by reading. Now, I found it doesn't have to be a specific book. Reading any book will do. And there are many reasons for this. Firstly, when we read, we are able to enter into a new world and forget about our own for a while. We become new people. We see different times, different places, and we experience different things. We can read the Harry Potter series and enter into the magical world of Hogwarts and witches and wizards and Quidditch, and we leave our own muggle existence behind. Or we can go with Katniss and Peeta into the arena and fight against the Capitol and the corrupt President Snow in the Hunger Games. We can meet Augustus when Hazel Grace goes to a teen cancer support group. We can laugh and cry as Hazel and Gus fall in love, all while battling the effects of cancer in The Fault in Our Stars. When we read books, we are able to get out of our own minds for a while, and that can be a huge relief. And sometimes when we go back into our thoughts, we find that our symptoms have lessened slightly. Another way that reading can help those of us who suffer from a mental illness is that it can show us that we are not alone. And that is something that many people with a mental illness feel. We feel that there's no one to understand us, no one who's going through the exact same things we are. We feel alone. But when we read, we see other characters, people who are going through the same things we are, and it's right there on the page in front of us, and we just go, oh, that's it. That's exactly how I feel. And we feel better. When we read about Alaska and looking for Alaska who has depression, Or Audrey in Finding Audrey, who has social anxiety disorder. Or Adam in The Unlikely Hero in Room 13B, who has depression. They show us that we are not alone. And that also can be a huge relief, to know that there are others think like we do, act like we do, and feel like we do. Another benefit of reading is that it lowers our stress levels. And when we're anxious, even when we're anxious like over everyday things like a test we have coming up or an essay we have to write, that causes tension in our muscles and it strains our heart. But when we read, it relaxes those muscles and it releases the tension. And we don't even have to read for long periods of time to get this effect. Studies show that after just 6 minutes of reading, our stress levels lower, and they can lower by up to 68%. Of all of the stress relievers studied, from going for a walk to listening to music, reading relieves stress the most. Now, I am not trying to say that reading alone can cure any ailment, especially ones as serious as depression and anxiety. But what I do know is that reading can help us deal with those symptoms. Reading takes us out of our own mind for a while. It gives us relief. Reading shows us that we are not alone, that there are other people just like us. Reading comforts us. Reading relaxes us. Reading gives us peace. Now, when I'm feeling anxious, especially when I'm feeling anxious at night and I can't sleep, I open a book. It might take me a few minutes to be able to focus on the words on the page, but I keep reading. And sometimes that takes willpower. It's hard, but I keep reading. And eventually, I am able to enter into the world in my hands, to feel the release of my worries. And when I finally put that book down, to fall into sleep without fears of lions jumping through my window. Thank you.